I pulled into the parking lot of Nevada State Maximum Security Facility and killed the engine, sitting there for a minute while the desert heat leaked through my windows. 3 months I'd been doing this drive, and I still got that twist in my stomach when I saw those concrete walls rising out of nothing but sand and scrub brush. The place looked like someone had dropped a chunk of hell right in the middle of nowhere, which, honestly, wasn't far off. I grabbed my thermos and lunch bag, locked the car, and headed for the employee entrance. The guard tower spotlights swept across the yard in their usual pattern, and I kept my eyes on the ground. First thing you learned working here: don't look at stuff you don't need to see. "Evening, Hanson." The day shift supervisor nodded as I badged in. "Quiet night so far." "Good." I signed the log and checked the time. 10:47 p.m. Leon would already be in the control room, probably with his feet up and that thermos of coffee that never seemed to empty. I made my way through the main corridor, past the administrative offices that stayed locked after hours. My footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, mixing with the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional clank from the heating system. Normal prison sounds, the kind you could ignore. It was the other sounds you had to worry about. I pushed through the security door into the guard station area and found Leon exactly where I'd expected, kicked back in his chair, watching the monitors with half-closed eyes. His uniform was wrinkled like he'd slept in it, which he probably had. Guy was pulling doubles all week to pay for his divorce lawyer. "Hey, Bo." He didn't look away from the screens. "How's it going?" "Can't complain." I set my stuff down and pulled out the small notebook I kept in my breast pocket. Same routine every night. Check the logs, go over any incidents from day shift, make sure we were both on the same page about which inmates needed watching. Leon stretched and yawned. Day shift had some excitement in Block C. Martinez got into it with his cellmate again. They moved him to isolation. Which cell? 12. Leon finally looked at me, and I could see how tired he was. Dark circles under his eyes, that slightly unfocused look people get when they're running on caffeine and stubbornness. Doc says he's good for general population, but I'd keep an eye on him during rounds. I wrote it down. Martinez in isolation, cell 12. Anything else? Nah, pretty standard day. Leon stood up and grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. "Oh, and the warden wants those incident reports from last week on his desk first thing Monday." "Got it." Leon paused at the door. "You know, Bo, I've been thinking. This overtime's killing me, but the money's too good to pass up. Sarah's lawyer's bleeding me dry." I looked up from my notebook. Maybe take a night off? Get some sleep? Can't afford to. He laughed, but it came out hollow. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? It's just babysitting, right? I didn't answer that. We both knew it wasn't just babysitting. Not here. After Leon left, I settled into the chair and looked at the bank of monitors in front of me. 12 screens showing different sections of the prison, cell blocks, corridors, the yard, the kitchen. Everything looked normal. Inmates in their cells, empty hallways, nothing moving that shouldn't be moving. But I knew better than to trust what I saw. I pulled out the folded piece of paper I kept in my wallet and read through it one more time, even though I had every word memorized. Phyllis had given it to me on my 3rd day, after I'd mentioned seeing things in my peripheral vision during rounds. She'd pulled me into her office that morning, closed the door, and stared at me with those sharp blue eyes for a full minute before speaking. "You're seeing things," she'd said, not a question. "I don't know what you mean." "Movement where there shouldn't be movement. Shadows that don't match their sources. Inmates in places they can't possibly be." She'd leaned back in her chair. "How long have you been working here, Hanson?" 3 days. "And you're still alive. That means you have potential." She'd opened her desk drawer and pulled out a sheet of paper. "Read this. Memorize it. Follow it exactly, or you'll end up like the others." The rules were typed on plain white paper, no letterhead, no official stamp. Just 6 numbered items that looked like someone's personal notes. Rule 1. Never look directly at the 4th floor camera feed. The 4th floor has been sealed since 1987, but the cameras still work. The hallways appear empty, but they are not. Guards who stare at this feed for more than 30 seconds are pulled through the screen. There is no way to retrieve them. Rule 2. During cell checks, do not make eye contact with any prisoner. If you accidentally do, freeze immediately and do not move until another guard taps your shoulder. This may take several hours. Do not speak, do not blink, do not look away. Wait for the tap. Rule 3. If you encounter a prisoner outside their cell during night rounds, do not acknowledge them. Walk past without looking directly at them. These are not real inmates. They are something else wearing familiar faces. Interaction will result in immediate and violent consequences. Rule 4. Cell 18 in Block D has been empty since 1987. The door is always locked. If you find it open, close it immediately without looking inside. Do not report this. Do not discuss what you may have seen or heard. Rule 5. If you hear chains rattling in the corridors, stop walking and cover your ears until the sound stops. The prison switched to modern restraints in 2010. The chains you hear are not from current inmates. Rule 6. If you see a prisoner walking away from you down a hallway, follow them until they disappear. Do not turn around or take alternate routes. Failure to follow will result in becoming lost in corridors that should not exist. I'd read through the list 3 times that first day, thinking it was some kind of hazing ritual, prison guards messing with the new guy. But Phyllis had made me recite each rule back to her, word for word, and tested me on them every day for 2 weeks. "These aren't suggestions, Hanson," she'd said. "They're survival instructions. This facility has a 90% turnover rate in the first 6 months. The guards who last longer are the ones who follow the rules without asking questions. What happens to the others? They disappear, or they quit, or they have accidents." She'd steepled her fingers and looked at me over her glasses. "The smart ones quit. The stubborn ones disappear. Which one are you?" I'd stayed 3 months now, and I was still breathing, still showing up for my shifts, still following the rules exactly as written. I'd seen other new guards come and go. Some lasted a week, some made it a month before they stopped showing up. Their lockers would get cleaned out, their uniforms returned to supply, and nobody talked about where they'd gone. But I was still here. Leon was still here. We'd started the same week, and we'd both figured out how to survive in a place that seemed designed to kill its employees. I looked at the monitors again, scanning each screen methodically. Blocks A through C looked normal. The kitchen was empty. The yard was dark except for the patrol lights. I moved to the next row of screens. Administrative areas, the infirmary, the workshop. My eyes started to drift toward the 4th monitor in the top row, the one that showed. I jerked my gaze away and focused on my hands. Rule 1. Never look at the 4th floor feed. I'd made that mistake once, about a month ago, and caught myself staring at those empty hallways for maybe 20 seconds before I remembered. My vision had started to blur around the edges, and for a moment I'd felt like I was falling forward into the screen. I'd looked away just in time. Now I kept a piece of tape over that monitor, just a small strip across the bottom corner to remind me which one to avoid. Leon had laughed when he first saw it, but he'd started doing the same thing after I explained why. The radio crackled. "Control, this is Perimeter 1. All clear on the north fence." I picked up the handset. "Copy, Perimeter 1. Standard check-in. The outside guards did their rounds every hour, walking the fence line and checking the gates. They had their own set of rules to follow, though I didn't know what they were. Different job, different dangers. I settled back in my chair and opened my notebook to start the night's log. Time, weather conditions, any incidents from day shift, current inmate count. The routine stuff that kept me grounded in normal reality while I worked in a place where normal didn't apply. 10:58 p.m. Night shift begins. Clear skies, temperature 72 degrees, no incidents reported from day shift. Current population, 847 inmates, all blocks secure. I clicked my pen and looked at the monitors again, carefully avoiding the taped one. Everything looked quiet. Inmates in their cells, hallways empty, no movement except for the occasional guard doing their rounds. But I knew that could change in an instant. This place had a way of staying calm just long enough to make you comfortable, and then hitting you with something that made you question everything you thought you knew about reality. I'd learned to stay alert, to follow the rules, to trust that Phyllis knew what she was talking about when she'd handed me that piece of paper and told me it would keep me alive. 3 months down, who knew how many more to go? I checked my watch and started planning my first round of the night. Block A first, then B, then C. I'd save Block D for last, that's where Cell 18 was, and I preferred to deal with that particular challenge when I was fully awake and focused. The radio crackled again. "Control, this is Block B, starting evening medication rounds." "Copy, Block B." Another normal check-in. The kind of routine communication that happened dozens of times every shift. It was the silence you had to worry about. When the radios went quiet for too long, that's when you knew something was wrong. I made another note in my log and settled in for what I hoped would be a quiet night. In a place like this, quiet was the best you could hope for, but I kept my notebook open and my pen ready just in case. I was doing my second round of the night when I heard it, that wet thumping sound coming from Block D. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what that meant. Cell 18. I stopped walking and pulled out my notebook, checking the time. 1:23 a.m. The sound was getting louder, like someone was beating raw meat against concrete walls. I'd heard it before, maybe a dozen times over the past 3 months, but it never got easier. The thumping stopped. Then came the scratching. Long, deliberate scrapes like fingernails dragging across metal, then whispers I couldn't quite make out, voices that sounded like they were coming from underwater. All of it from a cell that had been empty for 36 years. I walked faster toward Block D, my boots echoing off the concrete. The emergency lighting cast everything in that sick red glow that made the shadows look deeper than they should be. When I turned the corner into the D block corridor, I could see it from 50 feet away. The door to Cell 18 was open. Shit. I said it under my breath, but in the quiet hallway it sounded like a shout. Rule 4 was crystal clear. If you find it open, close it immediately without looking inside. Don't report it. Don't discuss what you see or hear. I walked toward the cell, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor about 10 feet in front of me. The scratching got louder with each step, and now I could hear something else. A low humming, like someone trying to remember a song they'd heard years ago. Don't look inside. Just close the door and walk away. I reached the cell and grabbed the door handle. It was ice cold, so cold it burned my palm through my gloves. The humming stopped. I started to push the door shut when something moved in my peripheral vision. Something big shifting in the darkness of the cell. Every instinct I had screamed at me to look, to see what was in there, but I kept my eyes down and shoved the door closed. The lock clicked. The scratching stopped. The whispers died. Even the wet thumping went quiet. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, listening to my own breathing and the distant hum of the ventilation system. Then I turned around and walked back the way I'd come, not looking over my shoulder, not thinking about what I might have seen moving in that cell. I made it maybe 20 steps before I heard the chains. The sound started soft, just a faint metallic clink that could have been pipes settling or the heating system acting up, but it got louder fast, turning into the unmistakable rattle of heavy chains dragging across concrete. I stopped walking and covered my ears. The sound got worse. Even with my hands pressed tight against my head, I could hear those chains rattling and clanking like someone was dragging them through the hallway right behind me. The noise seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, inside my own skull. I squeezed my eyes shut and counted. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. The chains kept rattling. 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi, still going. 6 Mississippi, 7 Mississippi. This was a long one. Sometimes they lasted 30 seconds, sometimes 5 minutes. I'd learned not to try and figure out the pattern. Just wait it out and don't move until it stops. 8 Mississippi, 9 Mississippi, 10 Mississippi. The rattling was so loud now I could feel it in my teeth, like someone was shaking a bucket full of chains right next to my head. I pressed my hands harder against my ears and kept counting. 15 Mississippi, 16 Mississippi, 17 Mississippi. Then it stopped. Just like that. Complete silence except for the ventilation and my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. I lowered my hands and listened for another few seconds, making sure it was really over. When I was satisfied, I started walking again, heading back toward the main corridor. That's when I saw the prisoner. He was maybe 40 feet ahead of me, walking away down the hallway. Average height, wearing the standard orange jumpsuit, moving at a normal pace like he had somewhere to be. Nothing unusual about him except for one thing. It was after 1:30 a.m. Every inmate should have been locked in their cells hours ago. Rule 6 kicked in automatically. If you see a prisoner walking away from you down a hallway, follow them until they disappear. Don't turn around or take alternate routes. I started following. The guy didn't look back, didn't acknowledge me at all, just kept walking at that steady pace, his footsteps echoing off the walls. I stayed about 30 feet behind him, close enough to keep him in sight, but far enough back that I wouldn't accidentally catch up. We walked for maybe 2 minutes, past the administrative offices and through the main corridor. The prisoner turned left toward the kitchen area, and I followed. He turned right down a hallway I'd walked 100 times before, and I stayed behind him. Then he turned left again, into a corridor I didn't recognize. That should have been impossible. I knew this prison's layout by heart. Every hallway, every turn, every dead end. But this corridor stretched ahead of us, lined with doors I'd never seen before, lit by fluorescent lights that flickered in a pattern that hurt my eyes. The prisoner kept walking. I kept following. We passed door after door, all of them identical, all of them closed. The hallway seemed to go on forever, stretching into darkness that the flickering lights couldn't quite reach. My footsteps echoed weird here, like the sound was bouncing off walls that were farther away than they looked. I checked my watch. 1:47 a.m. We'd been walking for almost 15 minutes, but that couldn't be right. The prison wasn't big enough for a 15-minute walk in a straight line. The prisoner turned another corner. I followed. This new hallway was different, narrower, with concrete walls that looked older than the rest of the prison. The lights here were dim yellow bulbs that cast long shadows between them. The air smelled like rust and something else I couldn't identify. We kept walking. The prisoner's pace never changed, never slowed down or sped up. Just that same steady rhythm, like he was following a route he'd memorized years ago. I was starting to get nervous. This was the longest I'd ever had to follow one of these impossible inmates. Usually they disappeared after a few minutes, turning a corner and just not being there anymore when I followed. But this guy kept going, leading me deeper into parts of the prison that shouldn't exist. My radio crackled. "Control, this is Perimeter 2, all clear on the south fence." I reached for my handset to respond, then stopped. The prisoner was still walking ahead of me. Rule 6 said, "Follow until they disappear. No exceptions, no alternate routes." The radio crackled again. "Control, please respond." I let it go. Phyllis had been clear about the rules. Follow them exactly, no matter what. The perimeter guards would figure out I was busy and check in later. We turned another corner. This hallway was even narrower, with walls that seemed to press in from both sides. The yellow lights were spaced farther apart now, leaving pools of darkness between them. The prisoner walked through the shadows like they weren't there. But when I passed through them, the darkness felt thick and cold. I checked my watch again. 2:03 a.m. We'd been walking for over 30 minutes now. That was definitely impossible, but here I was, still following this guy through corridors that couldn't exist in a prison I thought I knew. The prisoner stopped. I stopped too, staying back about 30 feet like I had been. He stood there for maybe 10 seconds, not moving, not looking around, just standing in the middle of the hallway like he was waiting for something. Then he started walking again, but this time he turned around. He was walking toward me. I could see his face now in the dim yellow light. It was Leon. My heart stopped. Leon, who'd disappeared 3 weeks ago. Leon, who I'd watched vanish from the control room after staring too long at the 4th floor monitor. Leon, who was supposed to be gone forever. But there he was, walking toward me with that same steady pace, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his guard uniform. His face looked exactly the same, except for his eyes. His eyes were completely black. Rule 3 hit me like a punch to the gut. If you encounter a prisoner outside their cell during night rounds, do not acknowledge them. Walk past without looking directly at them. These are not real inmates. But this was Leon, my friend, my partner, the guy who'd taught me how to survive the first month in this place. He kept walking toward me, getting closer. 20 feet, 15 feet, 10 feet. I wanted to say his name. I wanted to ask him what happened, where he'd been, how he'd gotten out. But the rules were clear. Don't acknowledge them. Don't look directly at them. Leon walked past me without stopping, without looking at me, without any sign that he recognized me at all. I kept my eyes fixed on the wall and let him go by. His footsteps echoed behind me as he continued down the hallway. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, then turned around. The hallway was gone. I was standing in the main corridor, right outside the administrative offices. The familiar fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their normal white glow on walls I recognized. My watch said 1:52 a.m. I'd been following that prisoner for maybe 10 minutes, not 30. And somehow I was back where I'd started, like I'd never left the normal parts of the prison at all. I pulled out my notebook and wrote down the time and location. Prisoner sighting, Block D corridor, 1:45 a.m., followed per Rule 6 until subject disappeared. No further action required. I didn't write about Leon. I didn't write about the impossible hallways or the 30 minutes that turned into 10. Some things you kept to yourself, even in a place where impossible was just another word for Tuesday night. My radio crackled. Control, this is Perimeter 2. All clear on the south fence. I picked up the handset. Copy, Perimeter 2. Sorry for the delay. No problem, Control. Everything okay in there? I looked around the empty corridor, thinking about Leon's black eyes and the hallways that led nowhere. Yeah, everything's fine. I clipped the radio back to my belt and started walking toward the control room. I had 3 more hours left on my shift, and I needed to check the monitors. The normal ones, anyway. The ones that showed real hallways with real prisoners in real cells. But I kept thinking about Leon as I walked. About how he'd looked exactly the same except for those eyes. About how he'd walked past me like I wasn't even there. About how Rule 3 said these weren't real inmates, but didn't say what they actually were. I made it back to the control room and settled into my chair. The monitors showed everything normal. Empty hallways, quiet cell blocks, nothing moving that shouldn't be moving. I checked the time and made another entry in my log. 2:15 a.m., completed rounds of all blocks, no incidents to report. I didn't mention Cell 18's door being open. I didn't mention the chains or the impossible prisoner or seeing Leon in an orange jumpsuit with eyes like black holes. Just another quiet night at Nevada State Maximum Security Facility. I picked up my pen and started planning my next round, but I couldn't stop thinking about those black eyes. about how Leon had looked right through me like I was the one who didn't exist. Maybe that's what happened to guards who disappeared. Maybe they didn't really leave at all. Maybe they just became something else, walking the hallways forever in orange jumpsuits, leading new guards deeper into the maze until they got lost, too. I shook my head and focused on my notebook. 3 more hours. I could make it 3 more hours if I stuck to the rules and didn't think too hard about what I'd seen. But I kept Leon's hat in my locker for a reason. To remember what happened when you got careless, when you stared too long at things you shouldn't see. Tonight I'd learned something new. Sometimes the things you lost came back, but they weren't the same when they did. I showed up for my shift at 10:45, same as always. Leon's car was already in the lot, which meant he'd gotten there early again. Guy was killing himself with these doubles, but he wouldn't listen when I told him to slow down. I badged in and made my way through the main corridor. The day shift supervisor was packing up his stuff, barely looked at me when I signed the log. "Quiet day," he said. "Nothing to report." That should have been my first warning. Quiet days at this place usually meant something was building up, getting ready to explode. I pushed through the security door into the guard station and found Leon exactly where I'd expected, feet up on the desk, leaning back in his chair with that thermos of coffee balanced on his stomach. But something was off. He looked worse than usual, if that was possible. His uniform was wrinkled like he'd slept in it, and those dark circles under his eyes had gotten deeper. "Hey, Bo." He didn't look away from the monitors when I walked in. "How's it going?" "Better than you, looks like." I set my stuff down and pulled out my notebook. "When's the last time you went home?" "Tuesday, I think." Leon took a sip of coffee and finally turned to look at me. His eyes were bloodshot and his hands had a slight tremor. "Maybe Monday. Days are kind of blending together." "Jesus, Leon, you can't keep doing this. Tell that to my lawyer." He laughed, but it came out hollow. "Sarah's asking for half of everything, including stuff I don't even own yet. I need every hour I can get." I wanted to argue with him, but I'd tried that before. Leon was stubborn when it came to money, especially when his ex-wife was involved. Instead, I opened my notebook and got down to business. "Anything from day shift?" "Martinez is back in isolation, cell 12 again." Leon stretched and yawned. "And Thompson in Block C has been asking about his appeal. Keeps bothering the guards about when he'll hear back." I wrote it down. "Medical rounds go okay?" "Yeah, no problems. Oh, and the kitchen's got a new delivery schedule starting Monday. Something about the vendor changing their route." Leon drained his coffee mug and set it on the desk. "Warden wants those incident reports on his desk first thing, by the way." "Got it." I made another note and looked at the monitors. Everything looked normal. Empty hallways, inmates in their cells, nothing moving that shouldn't be. "You heading out?" "In a minute." Leon rubbed his eyes. "Just want to finish checking the medication schedule. Make sure everything's set for tonight." He pulled out a clipboard and started going through the list, reading off names and dosages. His voice was getting slower, words slurring slightly. The guy was running on fumes. "Williams gets his at midnight," Leon said. "Rodriguez at 1:30, and Patterson." That's when I heard it. The crash of ceramic hitting concrete. I looked up to see Leon's coffee mug in pieces on the floor, coffee spreading everywhere. But Leon wasn't looking at the mess. He was staring at the monitors, his face white as a sheet and his mouth hanging open. My blood went cold. I followed his gaze and saw exactly what I was afraid I'd see. Leon was staring at the 4th floor feed, the monitor I kept taped over, the one we weren't supposed to look at. Somehow the tape had come loose, probably when Leon was adjusting his chair, and now he was staring directly at that empty hallway that wasn't empty at all, because there was something moving in it. A figure walking down the corridor, too far away to make out clearly, but definitely there. Definitely real. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going, and with each step it seemed to get a little closer to the camera. "Leon!" I grabbed his shoulder and shook him. Leon, look away! But he couldn't. His eyes were locked on the screen like something was holding them there. His hands gripped the chair arms until his knuckles went white, and his breathing became sharp and desperate. Leon, you gotta stop looking. I shook him harder, but it was like trying to wake someone from a nightmare. Come on, man, look at me! The figure on the screen was getting closer. I could see more details now. The orange jumpsuit, the way it moved with that same steady pace I'd seen before. But this one was different. This one was looking directly at the camera, looking directly at Leon. Shit. I grabbed Leon's face and tried to turn his head away from the monitor, but his neck muscles were rigid. It was like trying to move a statue. Leon, please. His breathing was getting worse, coming in short gasps like he was drowning. Sweat was beading on his forehead, and his pupils were dilated so wide I could barely see the brown of his eyes. The figure on the screen stopped walking. It was maybe 20 feet from the camera now, close enough that I could see its face clearly. It was Leon. Not the Leon sitting next to me, but Leon wearing an orange jumpsuit with those same black eyes I'd seen before. The Leon on the screen smiled and raised one hand, pressing it against what looked like glass on his side of the camera. The real Leon's breathing stopped completely. No! I let go of his face and lunged for the monitor, slapping my hand over the screen. But I could feel something pushing back from the other side, something cold and wrong that made my palm burn. Leon made a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a scream. When I looked back at him, his eyes were starting to roll back in his head. I had maybe seconds before I lost him forever. I spun around and ran for the door, taking the stairs 3 at a time down to the basement. The electrical room was at the end of a narrow corridor, behind a door that my master key opened on the second try. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the lock. The main breaker for the camera system sat in a metal box on the far wall. I yanked it open and flipped the switch, shutting down every monitor in the facility. The lights went out immediately, plunging the basement into complete darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in after 30 seconds, bathing everything in that eerie red glow that made the concrete walls look like they were covered in blood. I ran back upstairs, using my flashlight to navigate the red-lit hallways. My boots echoed off the walls as I sprinted toward the control room, praying I wasn't too late. I burst through the door and found Leon's chair spinning slowly, empty except for his hat sitting on the seat. His broken coffee mug was still on the floor, coffee spreading in a dark puddle that looked black under the emergency lights. Leon was gone. "Leon!" I called out, but my voice just echoed back at me. "Leon, where are you?" I searched everywhere I could think of. The bathroom down the hall, empty. The break room, nothing. I even ran outside to check the parking lot, but his car was still there. Keys probably still in his pocket wherever he'd gone. Back in the control room, I turned on the emergency monitors, the ones that ran on backup power and only showed the main corridors. The footage from the last few minutes showed Leon sitting in his chair one moment, then the screen going black when I cut the power. When the emergency cameras came back online, the chair was empty. He'd vanished in the 30 seconds of darkness between the main power cutting out and the backup kicking in. I stood there in the red-lit control room, staring at Leon's empty chair and trying to figure out what to tell people. How do you explain that your partner disappeared into a monitor? How do you write a report about something that shouldn't be possible? I couldn't. Nobody would believe it anyway. I sat down at the desk and pulled out an incident report form. My hands were still shaking, but I managed to write in block letters. Guard Leon Calhoun. Abandoned post at approximately 11:15 p.m. Personal stress related to divorce proceedings. Recommend disciplinary action. It was a lie, but it was a lie people could understand. A lie that made sense in the normal world where guards didn't get pulled through monitors by things that wore their faces. I finished the report and clipped it to the duty log. Leon's final paycheck would go unclaimed. His car would sit in the parking lot for a week before his ex-wife had it towed away, and I'd be the only one who knew what really happened to him. The radio crackled. "Control, this is Perimeter 1. All clear on the north fence." I picked up the handset. "Copy, Perimeter 1. My voice sounded normal, professional, like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just watched my friend disappear into whatever nightmare lived on the 4th floor. I looked at the emergency monitors, scanning the red-lit corridors for any sign of movement. Everything looked quiet, normal. But I knew better than to trust what I saw. I picked up Leon's hat from the chair and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it in my hands. Then I walked to my locker and put it inside, right next to my copy of the rules, a reminder of what happened when you got careless, when you stared too long at things you weren't supposed to see. I had 5 more hours left on my shift, and now I was alone in a place that had just proven it could take anyone, anytime, without warning. I sat back down in Leon's chair and started planning my first round of the night. The rules were still the same. Follow them exactly. Don't ask questions. And maybe I'd make it to morning. But I kept thinking about that figure on the screen, about how it had looked exactly like Leon, except for those black eyes, about how it had smiled when it pressed its hand against the glass, like it was saying hello, or goodbye, or welcome to the club. I sprinted back up those stairs like my life depended on it, taking them 3 at a time with my flashlight cutting through the red emergency lighting. My boots echoed off the concrete walls as I ran down the main corridor, past empty offices that looked like crime scenes under that blood-colored glow. I burst through the control room door and stopped dead. Leon's chair was spinning slowly in the middle of the room, empty except for his guard hat sitting on the seat like someone had placed it there carefully. His broken coffee mug was still on the floor, coffee spreading in a dark puddle that looked black under the emergency lights. Leon was gone. "Leon!" I called out, but my voice just bounced back at me from the walls. "Leon, where are you?" I grabbed my flashlight and started searching. The bathroom down the hall, I kicked open every stall door, checked behind the sinks, even looked in the supply closet. Nothing. The break room was empty too, chairs pushed under tables like nobody'd been there for hours. I ran outside to the parking lot, my breath coming out in white puffs in the cold desert air. Leon's beat-up Honda was still sitting in the same spot where he'd parked it, keys probably still in his pocket wherever the hell he'd gone. Back inside, I checked the emergency monitors, the ones that ran on backup power and only showed the main corridors. I rewound the footage to 11:15, right before I'd cut the main power. There was Leon sitting in his chair, staring at that 4th floor monitor. Then the screen went black when I'd killed the power. 30 seconds of darkness. When the emergency cameras came back online, the chair was empty, just spinning slowly like someone had given it a push. Leon had vanished in those 30 seconds between the main power cutting out and the backup kicking in, like he'd been sucked into whatever nightmare lived on that 4th floor. I sat down in his chair and tried to think. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my pen, but I had to write something. Had to make this make sense somehow. The incident report form stared up at me, all those blank lines waiting for an explanation. How do you tell people your partner got pulled through a monitor by something wearing his face? How do you write that down and expect anyone to believe it? You don't. I started writing in block letters, guard Leon Calhoun abandoned post at approximately 11:15 p.m. Personal stress related to divorce proceedings. Recommend disciplinary action. It was a lie, but it was a lie people could understand. A lie that fit in the normal world where guards didn't disappear into monitors and dead prisoners didn't walk the halls. I finished the report and clipped it to the duty log. Leon's final paycheck would go unclaimed. His car would sit in that parking lot for a week before his ex-wife Sarah had it towed away, and I'd be the only one who knew what really happened to him. The radio crackled. "Control, this is Perimeter 1. All clear on the north fence." I picked up the handset. Copy, Perimeter 1. My voice sounded normal, professional, like I hadn't just watched my friend get swallowed by whatever lived in this place. I looked at the emergency monitors, scanning those red-lit corridors for any sign of movement. Everything looked quiet, but I knew better than to trust what I saw. This place had just proven it could take anyone, anytime, without warning. I picked up Leon's hat from the chair and held it for a moment. It still smelled like his cologne and that cheap coffee he drank, still warm from his head. I walked to my locker and put it inside, right next to my copy of the rules. A reminder of what happened when you got careless, when you stared too long at things you weren't supposed to see. 5 more hours left on my shift, 5 hours alone in a place that had just eaten my partner and was probably still hungry. I sat back down and started planning my first round of the night. The rules were still the same. Follow them exactly, don't ask questions, and maybe I'd make it to morning. But I kept thinking about that figure on the screen, about how it had looked exactly like Leon, except for those black eyes, about how it had smiled when it pressed its hand against the glass, like it was saying hello, or goodbye, or welcome to the club. The radio crackled again. Control, this is Perimeter 2, all clear on the south fence. Copy, Perimeter 2. I made a note in the log. 11:47 p.m. All perimeter checks normal. No incidents to report. I didn't write about Leon. I didn't write about the 4th floor monitor or the figure that wore his face. Just another quiet night at Nevada State Maximum Security Facility. Except now I was alone with whatever lived in these walls. Alone with the rules that might keep me alive if I followed them perfectly. Alone with the knowledge that this job didn't just have a high turnover rate, it had an appetite. I checked my watch. 11:52 p.m. Time for my first round. I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the door, but stopped when I heard something. A faint sound coming from the monitors, even though most of them were still dark. Whistling. Leon used to whistle when he was nervous. Tuneless, random notes that drove me crazy during our first week together. I looked at the emergency monitors, but the corridors were empty. Just red-lit hallways and closed cell doors. The whistling stopped. I stood there for another minute, listening to nothing but the hum of the ventilation system and my own heartbeat. Then I walked out of the control room and started my rounds, following the same route Leon and I had walked together dozens of times. But now I was walking it alone, with his hat in my locker and his ghost in the monitors, in a prison that collected guards like trophies and never gave them back. I made it to Block A without incident, checked the cells, counted the inmates, made sure all the doors were locked, everything normal, everything quiet. But I could feel something watching me from the shadows between the emergency lights. Something that knew I was alone now. Something that was probably already planning how to take the next guard who'd replace Leon. I finished Block A and moved on to Block B, my footsteps echoing in the red-lit corridors. The rules were clear. Keep moving. Don't look directly at anything that shouldn't be there, and maybe I'd survive until morning. Maybe I'd even survive long enough to train the next guy. To hand him those same 6 rules and watch him learn what Leon never got the chance to understand. That in this place, survival wasn't about being brave or smart or strong. It was about following instructions and never ever looking too long at things you weren't supposed to see. I kept showing up for work. That's the thing nobody gets about this place. After what happened to Leon, after watching him disappear into that monitor like he'd never existed, I still came back the next night. And the night after that. And every night for the past 2 months. People think I'm crazy. Hell, maybe I am. But here's what I figured out. The rules actually work, if you follow them exactly. The morning after Leon vanished, Phyllis called me into her office. She didn't ask about my report or why I'd written that Leon abandoned his post. She just looked at me with those sharp blue eyes and said, "You survived your first loss." Then she handed me another sheet of paper. "Advanced rules," she said. For guards who make it past 3 months. I read through them while she watched. 7 more rules on top of the original 6. What to do when multiple rules kicked in at once. How to spot when the prison itself was hunting instead of just the things inside it. How to train new people without getting attached. That last one hit hard. The facility has an appetite, Phyllis said when I finished reading. It feeds on mistakes, fear, and guards who get too comfortable. You've learned to avoid the first 2. Don't fall victim to the 3rd. She was right. Every shift after that turned into a careful dance through supernatural chaos. I'd walk those red-lit corridors during my rounds, watching the corners of my vision for movement that shouldn't be there, ignoring prisoners who appeared in hallways where they couldn't possibly be, closing cell 18's door when it swung open, which happened 3 times that first week alone. The chains rattled longer now, sometimes for 5 minutes straight, the sound echoing through the walls until I thought my eardrums would burst. But I'd cover my ears and count Mississippi seconds until it stopped, just like the rules said. New guards kept showing up. They always did. First was Martinez, not the inmate, but a guard with the same last name. Lasted 2 weeks before he made eye contact with something in Block C and froze up during a cell check. We found him the next morning, standing in the same spot, staring at an empty cell. He wouldn't respond to anything we said, wouldn't move. They had to carry him out on a stretcher. Then came Williams, cocky kid from Vegas who thought he knew everything about prison work. I pulled him aside his first night, just like Phyllis had done for me. "Here," I said, handing him a copy of the rules I'd written out myself. "Read these. Follow them exactly." He laughed. "Come on, man. What is this, some kind of hazing thing?" "It's a survival manual." But Williams didn't listen. None of the cocky ones ever did. He lasted 3 days before he decided to investigate the 4th floor during his rounds. Found his uniform folded neatly in the stairwell the next morning, like he'd just vanished out of it. After Williams came Thompson. She was different. Quiet, observant, actually read the rules and asked smart questions. She made it 6 weeks before she got curious about the scratching sounds from cell 18 and opened the door to look inside. I found her hat on the floor outside the cell the next morning. The door was closed again, locked tight like always. That's when I understood what Phyllis meant about not getting attached. Every new guard was a potential friend, someone to talk to during those long nights. But they were also walking corpses who just didn't know it yet. So I stopped trying to save them all. I'd hand over the rules, explain what I could, and watch them make their choices. Some listened and survived. Others got too confident or too curious and ended up like Leon. The prison consumed everyone eventually, but I'd learned how to delay that fate. I kept Leon's hat in my locker as a reminder. Before each shift, I'd look at it and remember what happened when guards got too comfortable with the horror, when they started thinking they understood this place instead of just surviving it. Tonight was no different. I badged in at 10:45, signed the log, and made my way to the control room. The day shift supervisor barely looked up when he handed me the keys. "Quiet day," he said, same as always. I settled into the chair, Leon's old chair, and checked the monitors. Everything looked normal, but I knew better than to trust what I saw. I pulled out my notebook and reviewed both sets of rules, the original 6 and the advanced 7. Rule 1. Don't look directly at the 4th floor camera feed. I'd taped over that monitor permanently now. Wasn't taking any chances. Rule 2. Never make eye contact with prisoners during cell checks. Rule 3. Don't acknowledge prisoners found outside their cells during night rounds. Rule 4. If cell 18 is open, close it immediately without looking inside. Rule 5. Cover your ears if you hear chain rattling. Rule 6. Follow any prisoner walking away down a hallway until they disappear. Then the advanced ones Phyllis had given me. Rule 7. If multiple rules activate simultaneously, prioritize in numerical order. Rule 8. If the emergency lighting fails completely, remain motionless until it returns. Rule 9. Never train more than 1 new guard per month. Rule 10. If you hear your own voice calling for help, ignore it. Rule 11. The facility's appetite increases during staff shortages. Expect more activity. Rule 12. Guards who survive past 6 months become targets. Vary your routines. Rule 13. If you find your own belongings in places you didn't leave them, report to Phyllis immediately. I'd been here 5 months now, longer than anyone except Phyllis herself. That made me a target, according to Rule 12, but it also made me valuable. I was the only one left who could train new guards, who could hand them those rules and maybe give them a fighting chance. The radio crackled. Control, this is Perimeter 1. All clear on the north fence. Copy, Perimeter 1. I made a note in the log and checked my watch. 11:30 p.m. Time for my first round. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out, following the same route I'd walked hundreds of times. Past the administrative offices, through the main corridor into Block A. Everything quiet. Everything normal. But I could feel something watching me from the shadows between the emergency lights. Something that knew I'd survived longer than most. Something that was probably getting impatient. I finished Block A and moved on to Block B. Checked each cell, counted each inmate, made sure all the doors were locked. The prisoners were asleep or pretending to be, but a few watched me pass with eyes that reflected the red emergency lighting like animals. In Block C, I heard the familiar wet thumping from cell 18. I walked faster, not wanting to deal with that tonight. But when I turned the corner into D Block, the door was standing wide open. I cursed under my breath and approached carefully, keeping my eyes on the floor 10 feet ahead. The thumping had stopped, replaced by that underwater whispering I'd heard before. I grabbed the door handle, ice cold as always, and pulled it shut without looking inside. The lock clicked. The whispering stopped. I walked away without looking back, counting my steps until I reached the main corridor. 23 steps. Same as always. That's when I heard the chains. I covered my ears and closed my eyes, starting my Mississippi count. The rattling was louder tonight, more violent, like whatever made the sound was angry about something. It went on for 3 minutes and 47 seconds before cutting off abruptly. When I opened my eyes, there was a prisoner standing at the far end of the corridor. Orange jumpsuit, average height, walking away from me at a steady pace. I couldn't see his face, but I knew what I had to do. I followed him through the familiar route, past the offices, through the main corridor, toward the kitchen. But this time, when he turned left, I recognized the impossible hallway immediately, the one that shouldn't exist, with its flickering lights and endless doors. I'd been down this corridor 4 times since Leon disappeared. Each time I'd followed the prisoner until he vanished, then found my way back to the normal parts of the prison. Tonight felt different, though. The prisoner was moving slower, like he wanted me to catch up. I maintained my distance and kept following. The hallway stretched ahead, longer than it should be, lined with those identical doors that never opened. My footsteps echoed strangely, bouncing off walls that seemed farther away than they looked. After what felt like 20 minutes, the prisoner stopped walking. He stood there for a moment, then slowly turned around. It was Leon, not the thing that had worn his face on the monitor, but Leon himself. Same tired eyes, same wrinkled uniform, same nervous smile he used to give when he was scared. "Hey, Bo," he said. "How's it going?" I stopped walking but didn't answer. Rule 10 was clear. If you hear your own voice calling for help, ignore it. But this wasn't my voice. This was Leon's. "You look good," Leon continued. "Surviving better than I did anyway." He took a step toward me and I noticed his feet didn't make any sound on the concrete floor. "I've been watching you, you know, through the monitors. You're getting good at this job, real good." Another step. His smile was getting wider, showing too many teeth. "But you're lonely, aren't you? training all those new guards, watching them disappear. Must be hard, being the only one left. I wanted to run, but Rule 6 was still in effect. I had to follow until he disappeared. I could come back, Leon said. Help you train the new ones. We made a good team, didn't we? He was close enough now that I could see his eyes clearly. They were black, completely black, like someone had filled them with ink. All you have to do is look directly at me. Really look, and I'll be back. I kept my eyes focused on a point just over his left shoulder. The hallway was starting to flicker around the edges, like a TV with bad reception. Come on, Bo. Just look at me. Look at your friend. The flickering got worse. The walls were becoming transparent, and I could see other corridors beyond them. Other prisoners walking in impossible directions. Other guards following them into darkness. Leon reached out toward me, his hand stopping just inches from my face. Look at me, he whispered. The hallway collapsed. I found myself standing in the main corridor of the real prison, alone under the red emergency lights. My watch showed 1:47 a.m. I'd been gone for over an hour, but it had felt like minutes. I walked back to the control room on shaking legs and sat down at the desk. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely write in the log. But I managed to record the time and mark my rounds as complete. No mention of Leon. No mention of the impossible hallway or the thing that wore his face. Just another quiet night at Nevada State Maximum Security Facility. I opened my locker and looked at Leon's hat. Still there, still real, still a reminder of what happened when you broke the rules. But now I had a new reminder too. The thing in that hallway had been patient, almost friendly. It had offered me exactly what I wanted most. My friend back. Someone to share the burden of this job. All I had to do was look directly at it. I closed the locker and went back to my desk. 3 more hours until my shift ended. 3 more hours of following the rules, ignoring the impossible, and staying alive in a place that wanted me dead. The radio crackled. Control. This is Perimeter 2. All clear on the south fence. Copy, Perimeter 2. I made another note in the log and checked the monitors. Everything normal, everything quiet. But I knew better than to trust what I saw. This place had just proven it could take anyone's face, anyone's voice, and use it against you. It had shown me exactly how much it knew about what I wanted, what I missed, what I was afraid of. The prison was learning, getting smarter, and I was running out of ways to stay ahead of it. I pulled out my notebook and started writing a new rule. Rule 14. If dead colleagues appear and speak to you, maintain visual focus above their left shoulder until the hallway collapses. Maybe it would help the next guard. Maybe it would keep them alive a little longer. Or maybe the prison would just find a new way to hunt, a new face to wear, a new voice to use. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, I had rules to follow and rounds to finish. And Leon's hat to remind me that some offers were too dangerous to accept, no matter how much you wanted to say yes. The morning after Leon disappeared, I sat in Phyllis's office staring at the incident report I'd filed. She hadn't called me in to ask questions about it, hadn't demanded explanations for why I'd written that Leon abandoned his post due to personal stress. She just slid another sheet of paper across her desk. Advanced rules, she said, for guards who make it past their first loss. I picked up the paper with hands that were still shaking from the night before. 7 new rules typed in the same format as the original 6, but these were different, darker, like they'd been written by someone who'd watched this place consume people for decades. Rule 7. If multiple rules activate simultaneously, prioritize in numerical order. Rule 8. If the emergency lighting fails completely, remain motionless until it returns. Rule 9. Never train more than 1 new guard per month. Rule 10. If you hear your own voice calling for help, ignore it. Rule 11. The facility's appetite increases during staff shortages. Expect more activity. Rule 12. Guards who survive past 6 months become targets. Vary your routines. Rule 13. If you find your own belongings in places you didn't leave them, report to Phyllis immediately. I read through them twice before looking up. Phyllis was watching me with those sharp blue eyes that had seen way too many guards vanish. You survived your first loss, she said. Most don't make it past that. They either quit or get careless thinking they understand this place. I don't understand it. Good. Understanding gets you killed. Following instructions keeps you breathing. She leaned back in her chair. The facility has an appetite. It feeds on mistakes, fear, and guards who get too comfortable. You've learned to avoid the first two. Don't fall victim to the third. I folded the new rules and put them in my wallet next to the original 6. What happened to Leon, really? Leon broke Rule 1. That's all that matters. Her voice cut through my question like a blade. What matters now is whether you can do his job without making his mistakes. That night, I walked into the control room knowing everything had changed. I wasn't just a guard anymore. I was the senior guard on night shift, even though I'd only been there 3 months. Leon's responsibilities were mine now. His chair, his rounds, his shift reports, his chances of not making it to morning. I settled at the desk and checked the monitors. The 4th floor camera was still taped over, but I could feel it watching me anyway. Like whatever lived up there knew I was alone now. The radio crackled. Control, this is Perimeter 1. All clear on the north fence. Copy, Perimeter 1. My voice sounded steady, professional, like I hadn't just inherited a job that killed people. I pulled out both sets of rules and read through them again. 13 rules, total now. 13 ways to maybe stay alive in a place that wanted me dead. I memorized the new ones the same way I'd memorized the originals, word for word, until I could recite them in my sleep. At 11:30, I started my first round as senior guard. The prison was waiting for me. I made it halfway through Block A before I heard the chains. Not the usual soft clink that built to a rattle. This was immediate, violent, like someone was dragging heavy links across concrete right next to my ear. I covered my ears and closed my eyes, starting my Mississippi count. The sound went on for 4 minutes, longer than it had ever lasted before. When it finally stopped, I opened my eyes and saw a prisoner standing in the hallway ahead of me. Orange jumpsuit, average height, walking away at a steady pace. Rule 6 kicked in automatically. Follow until he disappears. But as I started walking, I heard wet thumping from the direction of Block D. Cell 18 was acting up again. Rule 4 said I had to close it if it was open, but Rule 6 said I had to follow the prisoner. Multiple rules at once. Rule 7 said, prioritize in numerical order. I kept following the prisoner, letting the thumping echo behind me as we moved through the corridors. He led me past the offices, through the main corridor, toward the kitchen. When he turned left, I found myself in that impossible hallway again, the one with flickering lights and endless doors. The prisoner walked for what felt like 20 minutes before vanishing into thin air. I stood there for a moment, listening to my own breathing echo off walls that shouldn't exist, then turned around and walked back to the real prison. The thumping from cell 18 had stopped, but when I reached Block D, the door was standing wide open. I approached carefully, keeping my eyes on the floor 10 feet ahead. The scratching sound started as I got closer, fingernails dragging across metal, desperate and hungry. I grabbed the ice-cold door handle and pulled it shut without looking inside. The lock clicked. The scratching stopped. I walked away, counting steps, but I'd only made it to 15 when I heard the door creak open again. I turned around. Cell 18 was open again, darkness spilling out into the red-lit corridor. I walked back and closed it, counted to 20, heard it open. This went on for 10 minutes. Every time I closed the door, it would swing open again before I could get 20 steps away. Whatever was inside was getting impatient, testing how far it could push before I'd break and look. On the 11th time, I closed the door and immediately started walking away without counting. I made it all the way back to the control room before I heard the distant sound of the door slamming shut on its own. The prison was cranking up the weirdness. Rule 11 said the facility's appetite increased during staff shortages, and we were definitely short-staffed. Leon's replacement wouldn't start for another week, assuming they could find someone willing to work night shift at a maximum security prison in the middle of nowhere. I sat down at the desk and updated the log. No mention of impossible prisoners or doors that wouldn't stay closed. Just routine rounds, all normal. The radio crackled. "Control, this is Perimeter 2, all clear on the south fence." "Copy, Perimeter 2. I made another note and checked my watch. 2:15 a.m. 3 more hours until my shift ended. 3 more hours of being the only guard inside these walls with whatever lived in the shadows. I pulled out my notebook and started writing. If I was going to survive as senior guard, I needed to document everything. Every pattern, every escalation, every new trick this place tried to pull. Maybe it would help me stay alive. Maybe it would help whoever came after me. The chains started rattling again at 2:30. This time they went on for 6 minutes. So loud I thought my eardrums would burst even with my hands pressed over my ears. When they stopped, I found my pen had rolled off the desk and was lying on the floor 10 feet away. I hadn't touched it since I'd been writing. At 2:45, I heard my own voice calling from somewhere in Block C. "Help! Somebody help me!" It sounded exactly like me, down to the slight Midwest accent. Rule 10 said ignore it, so I stayed in my chair and kept writing in the log. The voice called for help 3 more times before giving up. At 3:00, I started my second round. This time I found prisoners in 4 different places they shouldn't be. 2 in the main corridor, 1 in the kitchen, and 1 standing outside the administrative offices trying doors. I ignored them all, walking past like they were invisible. But they were getting bolder. The one in the kitchen stepped directly into my path, forcing me to walk around him. The one by the offices turned to watch me pass, his eyes reflecting the emergency lighting like an animal's. They were testing me, seeing how much they could get away with before I'd acknowledge them. I finished my rounds and went back to the control room. The emergency monitors showed empty corridors, but I knew better than to trust what I saw. This place could hide anything it wanted from the cameras. At 4:00, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the control room. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped right outside the door. I sat perfectly still, not even breathing until they moved away 5 minutes later. At 4:30, I found my thermos sitting on the desk even though I'd left it in my locker. Rule 13 said, report personal belongings in wrong places to Phyllis immediately, but she wouldn't be in until morning. I made a note to tell her first thing. At 5:00, the day shift supervisor arrived early. He looked surprised to see me still sitting at the desk. "Quiet night?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Nothing to report." He took the keys and the log, glancing at my neat handwriting that documented a completely normal shift. No mention of chains or impossible prisoners or doors that wouldn't stay closed. I gathered my things and headed for the parking lot. The sun was just starting to come up over the desert, painting the sky pink and orange. Normal colors after 8 hours of red emergency lighting. Leon's car was still in the same spot where he'd parked it 3 days ago. Nobody had come to claim it yet. Maybe nobody ever would. I got in my truck and drove home, but I couldn't stop thinking about what Phyllis had said. The facility's appetite. Guards who got too comfortable. The way this place fed on mistakes and fear. I'd survived my first night as senior guard, but I could feel the prison learning, adapting, testing new ways to break me down. Leon had lasted 3 months before he got careless. I was at 3 months now, which made me a target according to Rule 12. I needed to vary my routines, change my patterns, stay unpredictable. But I also needed to stay alive long enough to train the next guard, to hand them both sets of rules, and maybe give them a fighting chance, because that's what this job really was. not guarding prisoners, but surviving long enough to pass on the knowledge, to keep the rules alive so the next person might make it past their first week. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at my quiet suburban house. Normal life, normal problems, normal people who had no idea what went on in that concrete building in the desert. Inside, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with both sets of rules spread out in front of me. 13 ways to maybe stay alive, 13 lessons written in other people's blood. I was the senior guard now, the one who'd survived his first loss, the one who'd have to watch new guards come and go, knowing most of them wouldn't make it past their first month. But I'd also learned something important during that long night. The prison might be hungry, but it was also predictable. It followed patterns, tested boundaries, played by its own twisted rules. And if I could learn those rules, really learn them, maybe I could stay ahead of whatever lived in those walls. Maybe I could survive long enough to figure out what this place really was and why it needed guards at all. Or maybe I'd just last a little longer than Leon before it found a new way to hunt. Either way, I'd be back tonight, and the night after that. Because someone had to do this job. And right now, that someone was me. I folded up the rules and put them back in my wallet. Then I went to bed and tried not to dream about black eyes and impossible hallways and the sound of chains rattling in walls that shouldn't exist. Tomorrow night, I'd walk those red-lit corridors again. I'd follow the rules, ignore the impossible, and maybe make it to morning one more time. That's all any of us could do in a place like that. Survive one night at a time and hope the rules would be enough.